Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, May 9th, 2019. I'm Michael Brooks on a Sam/Michael/gang Thursday. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Lee Phillips and Michael Wazorski on the People's Republic of Walmart. In some ways, does the central planning of Walmart prove that there's nothing innately wrong with central planning? Interesting interview that Sam conducted with these guys.
Dunking on von Mises.
And is Walmart, that great global capitalist predator, inadvertently making a case for some form of socialism? That's a fascinating interview. Donald Trump Jr. has been subpoenaed. House Republican House panel approves a contempt for Barr, even as Steve Mnuchin, is refusing to release Donald Trump's taxes. The New York State Senate passes a bill allowing Congress to get those very same taxes. Juan Guaido deputy Edgar Zamorano towed in a car to prison in a Venezuelan crackdown, which sort of makes some sense, as these people have been trying to instigate a coup for several weeks. H.R. McMaster says the public is fed war wariness narrative that hurts U.S. strategy.
Good.
This is great. Again, we're still at war in Afghanistan. That's longer than World War II. We're still killing lots of civilians there. And speaking of U.S. strategy, the EU rejects Iran deal ultimatum and regrets U.S. sanctions as sane people in the world scramble to avert the war drums being pushed by Pompeo, Bolton, and Trump. AOC is partnering with Bernie Sanders on her first major piece of legislation in Congress. This is on capping credit card interests. Great bill. Potentially very important political signal. And Bernie and AOC have worked together to back striking Uber and Lyft drivers. I hope everybody backed them yesterday as well. Election results pouring in from South Africa, where it looks like ANC, the African National Congress, has crossed the 50% threshold that it will need to govern without a coalition, and registering some confidence in the leadership of Cyril Ramaphosa. Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes says it's time to break up Facebook as the obvious policy answers continue to present themselves, and potentially a script for a second Aaron Sorkin vehicle. Social Network Part 2, the breakup. Denver voters approve the decriminalization of magic mushrooms. And in fact,
hell yeah,
this is a very important policy area. People should absolutely have the freedom to explore their own consciousness. That's actually a very exciting initiative. All that and more on today's Majority Report. Sam is on the road, or just not here. I don't even know where he is. He could be sleeping, which actually, as much as I give Sam a hard time for being the 4-day-a-week man, because, he gives us a hard time for, missing a day. I will say he probably should get more sleep. So I hope he's getting more
Yes.
I hope he's getting sleep. Legit, the man should get more sleep. And you can tell when he's just and you would define your politics as...
Oh my God, I'm such a sleep monster. I feel so bad for him when I could tell he got 0 hours of sleep.
Do you have an easy time falling asleep though?
No.
Yeah, I don't have easy. Falling asleep is a challenge for me too. I wonder if that part of it probably is this job.
Definitely.
The key is to just game until like 2 a.m. and then you'll fall asleep immediately when you go to bed.
See, I can't. I need to slowly start putting away all electronics and going towards like books or taking a walk or whatever. But as long as the phone is really an accursed thing. All right, let's start with this piece of sound. This woman, Rachel Campos Duffy, I'm totally unfamiliar with her. My understanding is that she's part of some horrible couple that got their start on reality television, and now they promote, extremist propaganda, and her husband's in Congress. Is that true? So this has been a problem for right-wingers for a very long time. Because whether you're Ayn Rand or whether you're the Fox and Friends couch or whether you're, obviously Mitch McConnell or Donald Trump or the Koch brothers or Paul Ryan or whoever, you are there to valorize wealth at the expense of all other, not only human values, but just literally human attributes. There's nothing else to concern yourself with in life, and certainly nothing else to respect. And I think human nature is a complex thing. It's not as if we're born angels and then sort of corrupted by society, but we're also not born monsters. So human beings are complex. And one of the ways that we've managed intergenerationally, and I kind of feel like Jordan Peterson now, but I think it is actually true, is that we do, especially to kids, we tell stories where we try to instill and shape values and ways of responding to the world. So conservatives have a hard time because a lot of children's stories emphasize things like not being a prick. And if you're Rachel Campos Duffy and I'm just looking at them in a freeze frame, just the ever effervescent Fox and Friends couch, this not only is a problem for your sort of the spiritual death you're promoting across the world in terms of valorizing wealth at all costs at all times, it really is borderline communist conspiracy.
Rachel, let's ask you a little bit about this op-ed. And the headline on Fox News is, "Fighting Socialism Starts with the Little Red Hen." What are you talking about there?
Well, the topic is really that if you're not talking to your kids about socialism, and this is the battle in our country right now, free enterprise and capitalism versus socialism, that's the battle. And if you're not talking to your kids about it, somebody is. And it's not just in the textbooks and the curriculums at your kids' school. These messages, and I call them the merchants of socialism out there in the culture, they start very young. Our cartoons denigrate competition. There are all kinds of children's books out there. Look at the movies. I mean, when's the last time you saw a successful entrepreneur not be the villain in a movie for your kids?
Isn't Iron Man?
First of all, Iron Man is literally an arms dealer. But I think what this goes back to, and this movie's already really pretty old at this point, was the Lego movie that came out several years ago. And the villain in the Lego movie is a soulless CEO who legitimately looks like Mitt Romney. Like, I have no doubt, like, there was a Romney in the storyboard. So they're still feeling very sore over that. Sure.
In a movie for your kids or even for adults. So there are lots of subtle messages out there promoting socialism. But the good news for parents is that we are our first and most influential teachers for our children. So we have more influence than they do, but we have to have these conversations, and we have to start early. And I say one of the best books to start with is The Little Red Hen. It's the ultimate book about hard work and personal responsibility, deferred gratification, all the things that it takes to really achieve the American dream in America.
What do you tell your kids about socialism? Because I know you have some older kids. You have 8 children, and I know some of them are in high school. What do you teach them?
Jesus.
Well, the first thing you want to do is listen to them, because they're getting a lot of these messages, in class discussions, in their textbooks. But I say, Ainsley, you got to use all the time you have in the car, dinner time. If you have a small business, bring your kids to your work and show them what you do and how a business works. Tax preparation time. Tell them how many months a year you work to give money to the government before you actually get to keep a dollar of it. A lot of times kids don't know these things.
Tell them
up to
about
us
how
to teach them.
How if you are even a middle income or upper middle income business owner, you're paying a not insignificant portion of your income in taxes because there are people that are millionaires and billionaires and global corporations that are literally paying nothing. Maybe you could tell them that. But I'm sure you'd prefer to exhaust your kids with repeating the little red hen over and over again. You imagine these poor kids are in the car and their parents start like blabbing at them about Venezuela and like trying to like disinstill basic human empathy. Like you see a homeless person and the kid has like the appropriate moral response to be worried. And you're like, no, I'm sure that this person has totally messed up their lives.
That person could have worked harder.
That person could have worked harder. And if you're worried about them, you know, it's a liberal who gave them a housing voucher. That's why they're homeless. You want to read The Little Red Hen again? This is also another thing I'm sure that would really upset them. And this is, of course, the classic PBS children's cartoon, Barney. This is an example of really kind of a prototypical communist society and kids having a pretty good time.
Did you like the ride, Barney? I know. You can sit over here.
Now, did she charge Barney for that
Yeah, I was going to
ride?
say, now did she say, thank you, Barney, please write me 5 stars. That'll be $10. Now I need to go to my janitorial job at the school in order to earn my keep. Because again, that literally is the Dickensian dystopia that these people on Fox News want for all non-oligarch children. They want to eat them out of life so that ever shrinking margins can go to ever fewer people.
Wow, look at all their cool stuff. Mr. Boyd's gonna be surprised when he sees how many toys we've brought. There's a bunch here already. Yeah, it looks like lots of people brought toys to give away. I think it's nice to share with other kids who don't have any. Me too.
Wrong.
Disgusting.
Look at this
Disgusting.
kids.
Those other kids, what you need to do is like that classic Eddie Murphy routine where Eddie said, and we should have cut this, but the right answer, according to Rachel Campos and Duffy, as I understand her, in Fox and Friends, is, and Eddie did a great routine where when the ice cream truck came, there was always one kid that couldn't afford ice cream, and all the other kids circled around him with their cones and said, he can't afford it, because his father is an alcoholic, and he's on the welfare. That's what kids should be doing and learning, according to Fox and Friends and Rachel Campos Duffy. But this is the Barney world right here.
52% of American millennials would like to live in a socialist or communist America.
Yes, indeed, cheer. So
it's good.
So basically, like, these kids learning like the most basics of moral development is a strategic threat to these people's goal to return to some type of fusion of like, you know, sort of Blade Runner meets the 17th century.
Yes, indeed, boo. Yes, indeed, hiss.
Exactly.
Wait till she sees what's in the Bible.
Oof. Jesus was legitimately like all holy books, you can read whatever you want into it, but really one area where there is not super a lot of room for interpretation is Jesus on wealth policies. He had a lot of message discipline. Yeah.
And seeing her with her army of budding conservatives just makes me want to have an army of red diaper babies to fight them.
Who knows, though? Maybe her kids might turn out cool, though.
I hope so, because I worry
Yeah.
about kids adopted into families like that. It's concerning to me a little bit.
We'll keep an eye on them.
Mom! 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 Why did you do that to me?
One of today's sponsors is Skillshare, and anyone who goes to skl.sh/Majority Report 3 is going to get, I should say that again, skl.sh/Majority skillshare.sh/majority report and the number 3 is going to get 2 whole months of totally free access to Skillshare's entire library of super quality online courses and tutorials. Skillshare is a vibrant online learning community that offers courses on everything from design, video editing, photography, business, technology, cooking, and much more, and everything in between. There are Skillshare courses for everyone. You'll have no problem finding courses that will be useful to you in both your personal and professional life, whether you want to sharpen your skills with something you already love doing, or you want to learn to do something totally new. Skillshare has you covered. They have courses for entrepreneurs, courses on computer coding, web development, personal nutrition, learning new languages, Photoshop, you name it. I am finally going to reattempt to pick up a second language. It's one of my great regrets and shames in life. I did pick up some Turkish when I studied there, but I wasn't able to retain it. I tried to study Mandarin once and just didn't have the discipline for it. I think I might start closer to home and learn either Spanish, but potentially Portuguese, because I cover Brazil a lot. You can get 2 entire months free to access every single course offered by Skillshare by going to skll.sh/majority report 3. Just think of everything you'll have at your fingertips for 2 whole months. That's skll.sh/majority report 3. And we've put a link underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube, https:// And the show is also brought to you by Simple Habit. The Majority Report is being supported by Simple Habit. Simple Habit is a mobile device that provides a massive and diverse library of 5-minute guided meditations. Matt was just talking about hopping on the train himself. And the Majority Report audience can try Simple Habit totally free for an entire week when you go to simplehabit.com/majority. There's a growing body of scientific evidence. Look at Richie Davidson's neuroimaging work at the University of Wisconsin as but one of many examples. It can improve your health. It's showed to potentially even improve empathy and other vital emotional skill sets. Simple Habit has over 2,000 guided meditations specifically designed for different parts of your day and just about anything you might be dealing with in life. They have guided meditations for mindfulness, meditations for anxiety, for depression, when you're having trouble falling asleep, meditations for when you're wanting to overcome procrastination, or when you're having something important going on at work, meditation designed for parental units, for parents. They have meditations made specifically for when you wake up, on your lunch break, or when you've just gotten home from work, or when you're going to bed. As everybody knows, I've had different types of meditation practices for quite some time now, mainly mindfulness, sometimes mantra practices. And as I mentioned earlier, sleep is difficult, and I've been using this app to help me fall asleep, and it's been incredibly effective. I like the range of options, just even that there are so many different situations where meditation might be relevant, and I like how easy it is to use. Different people are trying to accomplish different things with meditation, and Simple Habit is able to cater to just about everyone, regardless of what their goals are with meditation or how much past experience they have with meditation. The variety of guided meditations on Simple Habit is what sets it apart. Simple Habit just won the 2008 Google Play Award for Best-Selling App. It's available for iOS, Android, and web browser. And the Majority Report audience can try it now, can try it for free for a week by going to simplehabit.com/majority. If you're watching on YouTube, we've put a link in the video description. We're going to take a brief break, and we're going to come back with Sam's interview on the People's Republic of Walmart, and then we'll take you into the fun half.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Lee Phillips, a science writer, and Michal Rozarsky. He is a writer and a union researcher, and they are the co-authors of The People's Republic of Walmart, How the World's Biggest Corporations Are Laying the Foundation for Socialism. Lee, Michael, welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. Great to be here.
So, all right, let's start with this. Michal, maybe you can start, or Lee, whichever one of you feels most comfortable. But this basically starts with I guess, a failed assumption by our good friends Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich von Hayek, who felt that central planning impossible. And therefore, we need a fully market-based system. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's right. In a way, the book isn't really organized about sort of a big thesis. It's organized around an idea, that idea of economic planning, of rationally deciding about production and distribution, rather than letting, as you said, market relations dictate both. And it's a way of bringing up to the present the calculation debates of the 30s and the 40s that starred people like Mises and Hayek on the right versus a sort of coterie of left-wing economists on the other side arguing for planning, and bringing it up to date in light of both developments in sort of information technology, but historical developments as well, and in light of the sort of fact that we don't really talk about, and that the right doesn't like to talk about, is that there is lots of economic planning that already exists in today's society on humongous scales, and it happens in the Walmarts and the Amazons, also, the NHS and other places in our economy, and it puts a lie to at least a good chunk of the calculation debate, which from the right was premised exactly on that fact, that this kind of huge scale of calculation is impossible. So we already plan, but we could be doing it very differently, democratically.
Lee, elaborate on that notion of just like, what are we talking about when we say we're planning? I mean, what what does that mean? And I guess maybe the best way to start is tell us a little bit about Walmart in that respect, because maybe it's too hard. Maybe it was too hard 100 years ago, 80 years ago, to imagine something so large being so centrally planned. But give us, why is Walmart an example of this?
Well, so even though Walmart exists within a sea of prices external to its doors, internally it's entirely planned. So there isn't an internal market there. There aren't, the managers don't don't sort of have an auction to see who's going to bid the lowest to be paid to move one box from one shelf to another shelf. It doesn't use market mechanisms internally. Now, this is very interesting because, probably the strongest argument that the right has ever mounted against the left, against the idea of socialism, is that it is very, very difficult to plan at scale. One of the aspects within the calculation debate was the challenge that across the course of the supply chain there's an infinitude of variables. And the price signal in the market basically compresses that, or encapsulates that, or most of that. And to replace the price signal with non-market mechanisms, with planning, would require basically an army of bureaucrats to replace, to both discover all that information and then to calculate it. So. This is actually a really, really good argument. But the problem here is that if the argument is that planning at scale with any larger than a small number of variables is impossible, then Walmart shouldn't work, because Walmart is this vast internally planned economy on the scale of if it were a country, it'd be a Sweden or a Switzerland.
All right, that's the thing that people need to understand, that we're talking about a massive, massive enterprise. And so Michal, what makes Walmart an economy as opposed to an enterprise within an economy? And then I want to talk about that notion of of being able to plan? Or maybe we should start actually with that. Let's start with that notion of being able to plan, because I just want to tease this out for people who don't sort of, spend a lot of time with these concepts. The idea that the right has is that we don't know where the equilibrium or how to make something this large function. It's almost trial and error. And the market basically is a process of trial and error in a way, and naturally comes to a point of equilibrium. Is that the theory? And then talk about why internally in Walmart it's an economy as opposed to like just an enterprise.
Sure. So, yes, in a way, that's the theory. I mean, the funny thing is that that theory isn't borne out in practice in so many ways. We have so many ways that so many market distortions and externalities, and that's things that the left talks about all the time, from monopsony in the labor market creating wages that are, quote unquote, too low at equilibrium, to things like, the price of dealing with climate change not being included in the price of fossil fuels. So even that image of a self-correcting, sort of equilibrating market is one that, as the right likes to say, works in theory, but fails in practice. And that's part of but regardless, the point that they were making is exactly that the market is this mechanism that's able to sort of correct and take all of this information and compute it. It's funny today to read sort of Hayek in the 40s, where he talked almost mystically about prices being action at a distance, which, in the age of smartphones and telecommunications networks spanning the whole globe, it sounds kind of quaint. We have action at a distance in our pockets on scales kind of unimagined by Hayek. And it also speaks to the way that his political project in a way worked, that our imaginations have been capped, they've been foreclosed after decades of neoliberalism, and these debates that we used to have in the 30s and 40s about how we organize the economy, how we organize social life, sort of in a much bigger way, not whether we tinker with this aspect or that aspect. They used to be really, really live debates. And then to bring that up to the present, to your question about Walmart, I mean, something like an organization like Walmart starts to show that these debates should have currency today, because Walmart is much more than just a store where you go and buy products. Lee can speak to this a bit more too, but they've basically, when you look at sort of operations research and economic research around Walmart, they've firmified. That's the word these researchers often use, the entire supply chain. So they've really integrated more and more and more of the supply chain into something that begins to resemble one firm rather than a series of sort of contracts between suppliers. And it's based on, again, these operations researchers, not known for lefty political views, focus in on the aspect of trust. There are a lot of there's some pretty cutthroat means to get people into these kinds of networks, but then there's trust that guarantees that the information within these chains is actually reliable and correspondent to reality, and it's not just the price signal passing things along, but what starts to look like a sort of planned supply chain that goes further and further closer to the source of our products. So Walmart is a big production distribution chain, really.
Lee, so I mean, is that what we mean by an economy? I mean that we have all these players there. They basically come into the family. They may be specifically Walmart, or they may be, an enterprise that is like exclusively deals with Walmart, right? And so is that, what is it that makes it, what is it that we're looking for that makes it, I can see the size of it, right? But we wouldn't necessarily describe it as an economy if it was just one massive store, right? Or would we? What is it? What elements is it? Is it the logistics? Is it the supply, the purchasing and the producing? What are the actual elements that make it an economy? And how is that different from, say, like even like I don't know, the U.S. military on some level?
Right. Okay, so why not describe it as an economy? It isn't a national economy. It's not a nation state. It certainly doesn't manufacture and produce all possible items in an economy. It required by our society. But also, no nation state does that. The only nation that attempts that, I don't think they really do attempt this, or what we could call autarky, trying to produce everything in a single society, would be North Korea. But all national economies produce a certain amount of goods and services, while other countries produce other goods and services. So, it's sort of a semantic discussion whether it isn't a country for sure. Nevertheless, the important thing for us here is that if it this very strong argument from the right within the calculation debate that you should not be able to plan at this great scale. And what we really wanted to do was use traditional, public sector counter examples, although we do that with the National Health Service in the UK as one of the examples in our book. We wanted to use some, like, the best example that capitalism had to throw at us. Walmart is the largest company in the world. Amazon is this marvel of logistics and distribution and prediction. So we wanted to use the best examples from capitalism. And the other thing is that often the argument is, even from the right, may even concede that, okay, well, maybe you can plan some large entities like iron production or coal mining, with a very small number of inputs, and so that possibly you could do that, but you certainly couldn't plan something along the lines of consumer items, because there are just so many more variables involved. So that was another reason that we wanted to use Walmart and Amazon as our prime examples. Was again, these are very much consumer-facing entities.
And so where the idea would be that a socialist government could adopt essentially these strategies or not even necessarily these strategies of a Walmart, but Walmart is almost a proof of concept on some level that you can have an enterprise this big and it can provide goods to this many people.
Well, planning is, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
go ahead, Michal.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. I'll say that yes, exactly. It is. In the book, that's the role. It sort of plays a kind of proof of concept. The importance is the scale and the degree to which prices matter less within that sort of, as you said, within that family, within Walmart, and the use of all of that extra price information that, again, some of the computing power enables. The flip side, and economists have sometimes talked about, they don't really like to look inside the black box of the firm because it has this sort of planning element that goes against so many of the traditional arguments. But when they have called Walmart or other large companies islands of conscious power, which is a phrase from an early collaborator of Keynes. What we also say in the book is that it's equally important to remember Noam Chomsky's sort of twist on that phrase, which is islands of tyranny. So they're a proof of concept for large firms, can be a proof of concept for just sort of the fact that you can plan and that the market isn't the be-all and end-all of social organization, but the way that they do plan is technocratic, highly authoritarian. In a way, if the Soviet Union is the traditional kind of reference point for planning for a lot of people and the bogeyman of the right, we kind of want to smear and tar Walmart and Amazon with that same brush, that these are basically, private fiefdoms. They're dictatorships internally. They also use authoritarian planning within a capitalist system. It looks different than the USSR in many ways, but it is a place where democracy goes to die, where we spend so much of our daily lives, and that's a place where what the boss says goes, and it's a very particular kind of authoritarian planning that happens under capitalism. So it's a proof of concept, but its application for the left in terms of what it would look like in daily life and what a full expression of sort of democratic planning would look like is limited in that respect.
Well, I want to just put a pin in that idea that it's also that it arguably is a cautionary tale on some level, right? And swing around to just, if you and I don't know who is better suited to discuss this, Lee or Michal, but Walmart didn't have to act like Walmart. They could have acted like Sears, right? And Sears was different how?
So when Edward Lampert took over Sears, known as Crazy Eddie, because he was such an admirer of the objectivist quote unquote philosopher Ayn Rand, that such a believer in the free market that when he took over and looked in the box that was Sears, he to see that it was entirely internally planned, he basically thought that Sears was communist, and horrified by this notion. He thought that he could quote unquote fix Sears by introducing an internal market mechanisms within the company. So that what this meant was that different departments would compete against each other, and he thought this would result in greater efficiencies and greater profitability for the company overall. But what ended up happening instead was that because these different departments were competing against each other, they were no longer interested. They had no incentive anymore to share information. Information became proprietary and secretive. This resulted in massive duplication, irrationalities such as the tools department getting their wares on the front page of the Mother's Day flyer, because that it was more of an interest to them. But even though that was undermining the profitability overall of the company, what's really sort of tantalizing about that is how similar that is to a market society as a whole, where each individual enterprise, each individual company is engaged in an activity that's rational for itself, to maximize its profitability, but that undermines the viability of the society as a whole.
I mean, that's the central tenet of that libertarianism, right? I mean, each person acting in their own best interest gives you a better outcome to the whole. And if you ever needed a comparison of that, of two similarly situated, I guess, economies, if you will, Walmart shows you that that's not the case, or that you can do it a different way, and Sears shows you the problems of doing it that way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so how is Amazon different from Walmart? Where does Amazon add into this equation?
In some ways, it's just another example. I mean, it's the main thing is taking that use of sort of information technology to the next level, and taking the level of sort of calculation, or taking the calculation problems that it's solving sort of to the next level, whereas, Walmart only has to get goods to X thousand stores. Amazon is getting goods to, X millions or tens or hundreds of millions of individual consumers. So you can see how the sort of calculation problems in terms of resource use and all of that become exponentially greater. And in some ways, what Amazon shows is that while some of these problems should be, and some of them really are kind of, some of the resource allocation, resource use problems really are kind of insoluble in terms of a really perfect solution. In theory and in practice, insoluble. But what it shows is you can get, a solution that's good enough. And again, in a way that isn't just using prices, but is increasingly using lots of other, types of information in order to plan and to come out with, the best places to put warehouses, the best way to route couriers, the best ways to do, X, Y, Z. And again, calculation problems that should be really, really too vast to compute, but they get the solutions that are good enough. And the real value in Amazon is, one, it's sort of cloud servicing, talk about that, but two is really the underlying, it's not really the warehouses and things like that. It's really the underlying algorithms that are doing the background work. The other thing that Amazon shows, and again, it has in common with Walmart and with basically almost all capitalist enterprises, is that then it uses that same information technology to create, increasingly dystopian working conditions. If you think about an Amazon warehouse, this is starting to get to those levels where people aren't taking bathroom breaks. There's ambulances parked outside on hot days. People are getting fired if they're not meeting these really draconian quotas. And again, it shows some of the problems of capitalist planning from the left's perspective, in that we have some tools here that are useful and that are useful to any project that would like to use planning to achieve social goals, but that would really want to transform it. It's hard to think of someone voting themselves into the role of Amazon warehouse worker in the way that looks currently,
right?
Or whatever you want, whatever democratic means you have for making decisions, but it's it is still a very top-down plan that ends up in this place.
Right, and when we talk about the exploitation of a Walmart or an Amazon, theoretically, right, that is, if you were to apply that to society at large, there wouldn't be that exploitation, which is born out of a rentier class that, shareholders needing to get their value from that worker. That doesn't exist, right, when we talk about society writ large, because that value is shared amongst the workers, as opposed to the value created by those workers goes to the shareholders.
Yeah, that's right. And we have a set, as a society, we have a different set of values, different set of sort of goals, rather than just profit maximization. So some of that might be more bathroom breaks, longer weekend, more relaxed pace of work, and the trade-offs of that compared to, say, producing more of a particular item or delivering it faster. Now, maybe we would want to, but we would at least be able to deliberate as a society which of these different targets we want to achieve. There's a multiplicity of them, rather than just a single target for shareholders, which is maximization of profit.
I want to come back to this question as to how we democratize. How does and we'll get back around to that. That's really the question. Yeah. But Lee, while we're here, why don't we talk about the Soviet Union and how to this extent this planned economy functioned in the Soviet Union.
Well, one of the interesting things about the Soviet Union is that it was not planned straight out of the gate. If you look at the economic history of the Soviet Union, planning sort of came in fits and starts many years after the founding of the Soviet Union, often in response to bottlenecks or just the collapse of the economy, and it took a long time for even after or during the Stalin counter-revolution to develop the sort of plans. The irony there is that the right will make the argument that one of the problems in the calculation debate was that because it's impossible for humans to replicate the army bureaucrats replicate the price signal, there will inevitably be shortages. Those shortages will result in chaos. That chaos will only be resolved through authoritarianism, and that's their explanation as to why the Soviet Union was authoritarian, i.e., the planning led to the authoritarianism. If you look at the history of the Soviet Union, it's actually the other way around entirely. It's that the authoritarianism undermines the planning, and that's very simply explained by the fact that, if you're petrified of being shot or sent to the gulag, if you don't meet your particular target, you'll lie and say to your superior, "Oh, actually, we've met this target or we surpassed it," and so the information in the system has a weaker fidelity to reality. So it's actually the other way around. It's the authoritarianism undermined the planning rather than planning leading to authoritarianism.
I think we're going to be talking to an author of a book about the cheating scandal at that school in Georgia, and the public schools in Georgia when they were under the gun about the race to the top. I mean, it's a similar dynamic there, I guess, where you've got to hit certain benchmarks, and the easiest way to attain those benchmarks is to lie about it. So I mean, but is the idea that the argument that was made in terms of a critique was the idea that the planning led to the authoritarianism because the planning was so rigid that it
not that it's rigid, but that humans would not be able to, or even computers would not be able to calculate or to represent information in the system in the same way that the price signal does. That it was simply impossible. Therefore, it would inevitably result in mismatches, in shortages.
And then you need the authoritarianism to maintain the chaos that came from the failure of the ability.
Exactly.
So the argument was that human beings don't have the ability, and we don't have machines that have the capacity to predict what the needs of the people will be and at what cost, and therefore you will get, subsequent to that, you will get chaos and you will get upheaval, and the only way to put a cap on that would be to have an authoritarian state to keep people in line, even though they are fundamentally feeling that their needs are not being met.
Yeah, and in a way it's a kind of fundamentally undemocratic argument in the sense of saying, we don't, not just at this moment, but generally people do not have the capacity to be able to sort of make decisions over social life together. They either need, according to that argument, you either get that kind of authoritarianism of the Soviet, or you have to impose market relationships where there's a criterion that makes tons of, totally irrational decisions. Like look at the production of fossil fuels, right? You get profitability that structures the behavior of everyone from capitalists to workers. And that, you sort of, as society, you sort of hand over decision-making power to this other kind of, blind criterion. And that, as a matter of course, then also, and they don't say this part, leads to all of these authoritarian workplaces as well, by the way.
Well, I mean, but that was sort of, then we're back to Mount Pelerin, right? And to von Mises and von Hayek, where they're basically saying, like, look, somebody's got to be in charge. And we're the most competent people to be in charge, essentially. And so, if the authoritarianism is going to come from us, it's going to be far more benevolent as long as we get our kickbacks, essentially. And so...
Well, our kickbacks and humanity is so flawed that we have to bind ourselves to the mast, and we're going to do it with the market. and we don't actually trust ourselves, as a collective to make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at their arguments, and to this day, I know libertarians, scratch the surface of them, and they will admit that they don't support democracy. They don't think it. They think that people are too stupid to self-organize, and therefore that is why we need markets. Markets are rational.
And
it's fundamentally an anti-democratic philosophy.
Yeah, my sense is that the Mont Pelerin folks too were arguing that there'll be people like us who will also be sort of like guiding things just a little bit, and as long as we keep the control out of the hands of we don't want things to get too sovereign, as it were.
Right.
So but how do you then? How do you do that? The examples that you're using when you talk about Walmart, when you talk about Amazon, Sears went awry, but similar dynamic. It was just a wrong choice made by an individual, Sam Walton, theoretically, and I'm just using, I don't know who exactly would have made these decisions at Walmart, but couldn't the response to be like, yeah, well, Walmart, even as planned as that economy is, when we talk about Walmart as an economy, it was planned by non-democratic means. And there was goals that were set up that were very rigid and were very specific. Whereas if you were to open that up to democracy in some fashion, the goals would be more diffuse, and all of those elements that allow you to plan for a Walmart wouldn't be there because of the democracy. What's the response to that?
I mean, in many ways, that's the $1 million or million labor token or whatever you want to say question. I think it's, for me, one answer is simply the negative, that it is a bit weird for me to think that this means that we have now of ensuring that lots of sort of lower level individual decisions are somehow coordinated with higher level sort of social decisions, that this is the only, or the best, maybe not the only, but the best and only possible, like, really long-term way of doing things, right? And that the cost of this, and we have massive irrationalities now. Again, I'll bring up the fossil fuels just because that is really the generational struggle, and that's a lot of this is a result of the kind of irrational production, the kind of incentives that capitalism creates. I mean, we talk very briefly about Elinor Ostrom in the book, who's the only woman to ever win the sort of fake Nobel Prize for economics, the Swedish central bank's prize. But she looked at sort of institutional designs. She pushed back on this idea of the tragedy of the commons, which is usually the thing that's kind of brought up as the background to this question, right? That if you leave it up to people to manage a common resource, and they all have, and it's this, and they all have their own goals, and there's all these different things that they might want, you basically end up destroying that resource. And the typical example is that, the pasture field for the village pasture field where everyone just gets their cows out to graze, there's no price, there's no sort of fee gate on it. And in a couple of years it's gone. Ostrom went back and actually looked at what did these institutions look like in practice. That's a very nice, again, theory coming from the right. But what it actually looked like was that you had lots of different institutional designs and mechanisms and ways to basically generate incentives and generate behavior that aligned individuals with collective goals. And some of those might have been, again, if we're thinking about 15th century England or whatever, some of these might not have been the best mechanisms. But the point is that humans have the capacity to draw up lots of different institutional structures, basically.
Right. Not everybody
and the point
wants
is to say what. Yeah, not
everybody
wants
wants
the
to
same thing,
be
but we
a
found,
cow shepherd, as it were, and some of
yeah,
those.
or a cow shepherd, or if the cow shepherds sort of, organize amongst themselves. And unfortunately, like I say, and at that time it was like, oh, if you overgraze, you're going to get ostracized from the village, right? It wasn't like if there is a $5 per day fee for grazing, and if you can't afford it, too bad.
Right.
You're not going to be able to be a shepherd. It was like, well, we're all going to have to somehow deal with this, and then you'll get, ostracized if you break it. Again, some of these might not be the best ways, but throughout history, we've had ways of dealing with these kinds of collective action problems. And it's kind of crazy to think that the sort of the way that subjugates all of our decisions to private profitability is the only like long-term feasible or desirable way to do this, that we couldn't decide, and we make decisions between different kinds of uses all the time,
right.
even though elections or whatever, we have some very limited forms of democracy, but they still are able to produce results where we're taking lots of different aims and somehow coming to a
so let me ask you both this. I mean, if the People's Republic of Walmart basically makes the case that we now have the capacity to as society to centrally plan, that it can be done, and theoretically the next book, right? I don't want to give you guys homework, but the next book is how do we set about not just assessing what society's goals are, but to implement that. It seems to me that the interim step is for people to have a certain awareness that these are political choices, right?
Yeah.
That these are all choices that we as a society can make, and we need to have that awareness that that choices are constantly being made, so that we could then say, okay, and now we need to develop a democracy machine that will allow us to sort of set this agenda now that we have the tools to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the important thing there is the we, right? That like it's not going to come from somewhere on top, and it's not that there's now a machine that exists that we could, sort of take over, but it's something that we can co-create. And I like that. I mean, in some ways, we actually have we've literally made that joke that this is the first book, and that it opens all these questions for a second. And the way this first one is about calculation, and the next step is to talk about all these sort of coordination problems and all of that, and that involves even more talking about that kind of bottom up democratic organizing would be necessary to implement anything like this and to solve some of these problems. I think that we're still at that kind of baby steps stage, in the sense that our imaginations, as I said before, have been sort of so foreclosed that it's important to just say, there's lots of planning that already exists, and it's not so controversial an idea.
I would just add that already in society, however limited or constrained our democracies are, there's still enormous leaps over sort of previous feudal societies. Some countries are more democratic than other ones. There are, Iceland is a unicameral country. The United States has all sorts of semi-feudal carbuncles, like the Electoral College and the Senate. And, so already, even when we say that the next question is, well, what does that democracy look like? There are already in societies, there are better and worse versions of democracy. And we should sort of be building on those rather than imagining that something it has to be cut from entirely new cloth. It's about an extension of democracy from the political realm into the economic realm. And we already have some examples where that works so much better than authoritarianism.
I mean, do you think, are there any proposals that are being floated around now in the political discourse that you think also function in the same way to show that type of central planning is possible, obviously on a more limited scale, but that are in the mix that could be applied? Like, is single payer healthcare an example of something like that?
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, especially in the American context, one of the chapters in the book is about the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. The chapter is called "Nationalization is Not Enough." So in some ways, it's a cautionary tale, or a tale about how even the fact that something is, state-run planning doesn't automatically excuse it from critiques of it not being democratic enough and not involving patients and workers in the actual co-creation. But it's a huge leap over what currently exists in the U.S., which is this kind of, again, showing really the irrationality of a market-based system when it's applied to something like healthcare, where you have such big gaps in simple access to healthcare. Where when the NHS was created, the first thing was to create this national system where at least people had access. And then in the 1970s, there were these interesting experiments that started to lay the groundwork for introducing more democratization. I won't go into it. There's a few things that we bring up that opened the door to more sort of co-creation by workers and patients that were effectively shut down, in the 80s and 90s, where you actually had a kind of the same idea as Lampert's in Sears applied to the NHS, where you had all these market relationships sort of imposed internally to the NHS, which, while being still a single payer system, now internally had all these sort of webs of contracts between producers and purchasers. And in the US, it would be a huge step just to get to that national system where you could say, again, it's not the insurance companies deciding who's going to get what care and the amount of money in people's pockets deciding about what kind of coverage and what kind of care they can get, but some kind of social process that takes all of this and again, takes all of that information and is able to make decisions in a different way.
Michal Rozworski, Lee Phillips, thanks so much for your time today. We will put a link to People's Republic of Walmart, how the world's biggest corporations are laying the foundation for socialism, at the Majority.fm website. Thanks again for your time.
Great to be here.
Thanks so much, Sam.
Fascinating interview. I'm going to read that book. I'm currently reading Bhaskar Sunkara's, of course, great new book. He's going to be on tomorrow.
I could be wrong, but I think that interview was one big, long dunk session on von Mises and Hayek.
I think there was some broader ramifications of it, but yes.
Yeah, you can see the wheels turning in Sam's head. Like, I feel like he'd be a really good big government socialist.
Well, he's like, look, if getting rid of capitalism means an incredible savage talking point for a disturbed young man that called this show to talk about deregulation, then God damn it, I'm a socialist. Hello. Oh, yeah.
That literally is just like a tree of branch of the different libertarian sort of arguments, right? Like, central planning doesn't work. Well, what do you make of Amazon or Walmart?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which it's a very potent argument, and I think true, that we're both in a different phase of capitalism in the sense of acceleration of environmental destruction, global supply chains. Like, it's very dangerous in terms of like future viability or even relatively immediate viability of human life continuing to exist. And then on the other hand, some of the conditions, if you flip them, particularly from global networks, really advanced centrally planned supply chains, and Amazon and Walmart, you have some of those conditions in place, actually.
Absolutely.
To transition to a post-capitalist economy.
We have the productive capacity to make everything that everyone in the world needs and distribute it democratically. The primary obstacles are, as usual, political.
Definitely. Folks, this Sunday, we're going to, well, actually, I'm not sure what the illicit history is going to be quite yet for this Sunday. We're probably going to be doing something actually very Iran specific. So let me just point everybody back to Tuesday with Reniqua Allen and Ben Burgess. And if you want to get a sense, I mean, you can really at this point, I think, get a fairly, not all of the Patreon content, but you get a pretty good flavor of TMBS with all the clips that we have on the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. And of course, the best thing to do is become a patron, get all of the illicit histories and primers, get informed from Hegel to Jamaica. Patreon.com/TMBS Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Jamie.
This week on the Antifada, we have special guest Katie Halper of the Katie Halper Show to talk about the 90s, the politics of the 90s and the culture of the 90s, and how a lot of those phenomena kind of prefigured what's happening now in our political world. She talks a little bit about her journalism, her interview with Juanita Broaddrick, liberal hypocrisy, along those lines with regard to Bill Clinton's transgressions alleged. And, you know, I mean, I believe Juanita Broaddrick, but you guys can make up your own minds about that.
Hashtag me too.
Hashtag.
Yeah. Also, we are doing a live show tomorrow, me and Katie, along with Struggle Session, Leslie Lee III.
Big Leslie Lee III fan.
He's
big fan.
He is the man.
Great guy.
Jake Flores. Does a great job. Matt Taibbi, and more. The other guy from Struggle Session. Oh my God. Jack Allison. Jack Allison. Yes.
Got some hitters there.
Yeah, it's going to be so
it's
good.
A strong lineup.
At Littlefield tomorrow in Brooklyn at 8 p.m.
I saw a really cool tweet where an awesome guy who said, it was like before February, I had never been to a political show. Then I went to TMBS in Brooklyn. Then I went to TMBS in LA. And now I'm totally convinced that this is really fun. And I'm going to Littlefields.
Hell yeah.
So there it happens.
We all rise together.
And you never think I understand why generically you wouldn't be too excited to go to a political live show, but we actually make them super fun.
Oh yeah.
So
and Struggle Session is very much based around pop culture as well. It's like pop culture from a leftist perspective.
It's a fun show.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all kinds of fun things that I definitely know what all of them are already.
Exactly. Live show mode. Matt, what's going on?
This weekend on the Literary Hangover, The Song of Hiawatha by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, or as I like to call it, Indian Jesus, because it's basically, if you look at it, it's a story of Indian, Native American Jesus type fellow who prepares his tribe to basically hand off the land to the white people. And we talk about that as a sort of very popular poem and as problematic and also too liberal for the New York Times at the time. Coming up, we're going to be doing some more George Orwell for patrons, the essay Such Were the Joys about his time at private school. That's in a couple weeks.
It's an amazing title.
Yeah, it's from I think a William Blake poem.
Because I'm assuming,
he's very unkind.
Like not a good experience.
It's eating that makes you a man.
Yeah, he
in a
is.
certain sense.
It's basically it's not accurate factually at all. It's very it would have been libelous if he printed it in his lifetime, and he didn't. And we're also doing Margaret Fuller, who I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with her. She's sort of the first publishing feminist in America. She wrote Woman in the 19th Century. She was part of the She was part of the transcendentalist sort of Concord set.
Yeah, she was part of the Concord scene.
And she later went to Europe during the 1848 revolutions. Was the first female correspondent for a newspaper.
Wow.
Met Mazzini over there and became a socialist during that whole stuff in Italy. So
that's amazing.
Cool.
We'll be
that
doing
sounds
her
really
as
dope.
well. So
awesome. And of course, become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Go to justcoffee.coop for all of your coffee needs and check out the sponsors. We'll see you in the fun half. folks here with the gang. Let's see. Let's take one call out of the gate. You're calling from a 503 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Jason from Portland, Oregon.
Hey, Jake, are you in a
I
car?
just wanted to call yeah, drive a truck.
Okay, yeah, now you're better. Go ahead, man. What's on your mind?
Well, I was thinking that the best way to address inequality would be just to tie CEO pay to like 30 times the lowest paid worker and maybe cap all at like 500 million or less or something. I was just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I'm sorry, what is it again?
Tying CEO pay to the lowest paid workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a nice reform. I'm more interested, I really am interested in like the guests in that interview and Richard Wolff's work in generating, particularly actually if they're going to be large-scale enterprises, to breaking them up into smaller bits and seeing if they could be significantly democratized. I mean, that's what that's fundamentally my politics. But I think, I mean, obviously that's a useful metric when you explain the rapid, explosion of inequality of the last 40 years. And it is. I mean,
do you think that's achievable with Bernie, or is that something that's going to be a long ways away?
That sounds like a Warren reform, personally.
It sounds like, I think Bernie's more working on really getting some structural reforms to our economy so that is less. But, I mean, I don't know, though. I mean, you can't legislate. I mean, I don't know that you can maybe you could. I don't know what the legal implications of mandating a private company's pay structure. Like, I don't know if that would fly.
Yeah, I think you can. I think they've tried it in other places.
Yeah,
no?
but I'm talking here.
Constitutionally.
Yeah, I'm doubting with the Supreme Court.
I mean, I feel like just raising high top marginal rates and stuff might just be easier to do.
I feel like that's the thing, is you just, in the system equation we're in, there's all sorts of ideas. Like Bernie's actually been, I think, mirroring some ideas from Labor in the UK of using government funds to help people buy.
I think the nuances between the different sized businesses would definitely have to be addressed. But the last final thing I wanted to ask is, what about the Mint coming up with like couple $1 trillion coins to lower the debt? And I know part of the debt is actually just like Social Security owed to the people, but that would be. Like,
I'm not worried about the debt. I don't care. The deficit is not our issue. I'm not worried.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah, the nominal debt doesn't matter. You just need to invest it in smarter places.
Yeah,
than,
and I guess
Pentagon and cruise missiles.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like you want to deal with the debt, then again, I mean, all of these. Do you have the political will and the capacity to make billionaires not exist anymore? To drain, like. There's a quote. I'm told it's apocryphal, but people ask, and I shouldn't even use this quote because it's not robbery. It's actually taking back stolen things to begin with. But Willie Sutton was asked, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Like, the money is glutted in a minuscule part of the population structurally. Get that money back. And then use that money to invest in basic, obvious human sanity, like single-payer healthcare, like free college, like infrastructure upgrades, like transitioning to a post-carbon economy, but also look at using government in such a way that could, again, support the development of things like a modular-grown economy.
Yeah, it's like Brian from Street Fight Radio said, your work made that money. That's your money, and we're going to get it back.
Right. Exactly. And, if this kind of talk freaks you out, this ad that Momentum put out is very good, Momentum in the UK. Now, again, anytime I use a piece like this, I know from some people, look, yes, he's talking about social democracy. This is not the furthest reaches of radicalism, but that's totally fine. This type of work needs to be done if that word is going to be used, and we're going to decontaminate it, and we're going to get people to think in a mature and humane way about politics. This is a good piece.
You often hear people asking,
Has socialism worked anywhere it's been tried?
Name one country that socialism has ever worked.
the answer is everywhere.
Wait, what?
Socialism is pooling our resources together and using them for the common good. And it's been successfully implemented all around the world. That could mean things like publicly funded healthcare. So if you live in Britain and you like the NHS, then guess what? You're a socialist.
Oh, me?
Don't believe me? Look at how they describe publicly funded healthcare in America.
The socialist idea of universal healthcare.
Britain's socialized medical system, healthcare, all government provided, God forbid, like England.
Do you like publicly funded teachers, police, firefighters, schools, roads, and libraries? Think wealthy corporations like Google and Amazon should actually pay some tax to pay for these things? Well, then you're a massive socialist.
I'm a what?
So next time you hear someone trying to scare you about socialism,
The ugly, destructive, Marxist, militant, socialist.
remember, they're talking about you. Socialist.
That's a good ad, and I have this, and in in a UK labor context, that is more formally true than it is in the United States. Like, we have significant great social democratic reforms that happened in the New Deal and even the Great Society, including things like that are making your life tolerable today, were passed in the 30s and sort of protected. In the UK, with things like the NHS, they have actually achieved some advancement of decommodifying parts of society and generating much better human outcomes. And part of the evidence, that countervails all of the lies and fear-mongering about the NHS that you hear on Fox is the fact that there was a poll that came out a couple years ago that British people rated the NHS over winning World War II as an accomplishment. Now, obviously, they probably wouldn't have had the NHS if they didn't defeat Hitler, but that should give you some sense of what actual people think of being able to go and see a doctor when they need to see one. And the whole waiting list thing, there's waiting lists here too for non-emergency care, and tens of millions of people get no care, and even people with health insurance go bankrupt all the time. So get real, get socialist.
The wait list thing is such a joke at this point.
I know.
It's when it's clear
That's all
that
they got.
That it's like there's just not a list because people just can't afford to it. Like, I can't get on a list to buy a Bugatti, right?
Right.
Like,
I'm on
Yeah.
the Bugatti list.
I
and
mean-
never tap. Where's my name is finally going to come up on the Phantom list.
There are some problems with the NHS, I'm not going to lie, but all of them have to do with underfunding it
Well, right.
as the Labour Party slid into a modern neoliberal party.
Well, the modern cuts, one of the things I have to say that kept Blair and Brown in power for a long time is Tony Blair tried to introduce privatizations, which was a big problem. They actually put huge amounts of money in the NHS, which had been bled under the Tories before them. So even neoliberal third-way Labour put a ton of money. And even in 2005, at the height of the Iraq invasion and disgust with them, look, again, I always say communication matters and political skills matter. And even at his least popular, Tony Blair is an effective, very effective campaigning politician. But Gordon Brown had this thing that he said the red lines. The red lines are NHS, and there was one other public spending thing that I don't remember. But NHS was one of their, even at their most right wing, to the point where when David Cameron came to power, he lied. He said the Tories would never cut NHS spending. He actually said that he was trying to actually rhetorically attack Labor from the left on the NHS.
That is the power of universal programs right there.
Without a doubt. It's also the power of universal programs that even to this day, there's a new book that's coming out from Zero Books, I think called 10 Steps to Destroy the NHS. It's not that they won't try, but the NHS is still standing, even under the Tory onslaught post-financial crisis. Yes, universal programs are very effective. Yes. West Coast Comrade, does MR not have the best interviews? Pajama Boy, comedians like Nick DiPaolo aren't fighting any sort of culture war. They're afraid their well of creativity's run dry, so they dig in rather than evolving and reshaping their craft in a way not unlike that you'll see from Dennis Quaid in The Intruder, now in theaters. Okay. I buy, it is amazing because I've never followed Nick DiPaolo particularly closely, but he's not somebody that I would put in the bracket of yeah, that guy's just not funny. He's got some comedic broad comedic chops from what I've seen, and that was just like, dude, I don't know if financially you're not able to hang it up, but whew.
There's like a sense of like,
that was brutal how unfunny that was, in addition to all the other things.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just sad.
Sad.
Very low energy. Leftist European, the Danish prime minister has announced an election for the start of June. The polling so far is the left party is getting 55% combined, but a YouTube Nazi is standing in election and getting around 2 to 3%. Wish us luck. Well, I mean, that sounds not bad.
Yeah, that's.
I got to be honest with you.
If that's the future, then let's hope it holds that.
Yeah,
way.
word. Train boy, Connecticut just passed a $15 minimum wage. Well, that's terrific.
Hell yeah. My home state's good for something.
Not much. You're calling from a 760 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey there, guys. This is Kentucky Fried Comrade.
Kentucky Fried Comrade, how are you? What is on your mind?
I'm doing pretty good. So I know this is kind of bleeding into your show, Michael, but I want to bring it into this one. I want to dunk on Nate Silver for a minute.
Okay, can you, because we did cover this in the TMBS post game, but as I say to people, like, reset it for people who haven't seen that.
Yeah, for anyone who's not like on Twitter, Nate Silver's basically been on one for the past 2 weeks or so.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember the exact take, but it was something like, if I remember correctly, it was something about how black people are going to coalesce around Kamala Harris for, finger quotes, reasons. Something like that was the take.
I didn't see that one. I saw the, he did some dumb, like, Biden and Bernie are both old white men, which A, is anti-Semitic, and B, is totally policy illiterate. The thing though that people have been noticing about Nate Silver, and we made this point, but plenty of people have made this point, is that he's going on these Twitter tirades where it's like, look, he's a right-wing corporate, whatever word you want to use. He's a right-wing Democrat. Hopefully we can find some of these tweets. But his brand is that he's a stats guy. And what he's doing in the process of, like, in one of the tweets that he put out kind of heralding Biden and smearing Bernie, he said that he basically implied that policy isn't necessarily important to Democratic voters. Now, that same poll, 75% of Democratic voters said Medicare for All was a very important policy. Now, like, I take Sam's point that he constantly drums in that people aren't necessarily that policy oriented. And I think that that's true, but I also think it's not necessary. Here's the thing. I think it's true to some extent, but I also think that for people in different geographies and different class backgrounds, their sense of signifying what's important to them, even if they interpret policy through a cultural lens, is different than most people in the media. So they might not be as policy focused because maybe most people aren't necessarily in the nitty gritty of policy. But when Bernie Sanders comes out and he's like, the truth of your life is that you're exhausted and robbed, that resonates with a vast majority of people who frankly are not living in an easy bubble of affluence where, they can afford to, as an example, like, look, you can, don't vote for Bernie, whatever, if that's not your politics, if you have more right-wing politics or whatever. To hate Bernie Sanders unless you're a Koch brother is bizarre. It's weird. Like, it is an incredible effect of the propaganda campaign of the Clintons. So what Nate Silver is doing, though, is none of these arguments are even remotely empirically grounded, and he's using the patina of being like the pointy-headed stats guy, which I thought already should have been pretty significantly called into question, to just make assertions that fit with his pre-existing ideological bias. So, that's why it's been sort of so exhausting and dumb to watch him do this. This is the tweet you're talking about. What's interesting with Harris is that black Democrats tend to be more moderate than white ones. Corollary, the left is pretty white. Maybe she's maybe she should have been better off positioning herself as more moderate, although there's still plenty of time to do that. Now, what is he talking about?
Yeah, like, where is he getting that from?
Well, he could be getting that.
Well, so that's the thing.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of why I called in here, is that on the one level, he says stuff like this that has, again, it's kind of like what you said earlier, Michael, and I am going to like shamelessly plug my podcast because
go for it.
Episode 3, In Too Deep, we do a deep dive into Nate Silver. We talk about his weird racial phrenology, voter phrenology.
Oh, all like
where
the
he
coffee
talks about
dads
voters
and stuff. Sorry.
Yeah, he talks about how
Jesus,
like
he does that too.
God,
he's lame.
Like black voters are apparently just going to go to Kamala Harris or Cory Booker, and he doesn't give an explanation for it, but it's implicit in what he says. But I did want to give an explanation as to why he shifted from the data guy to the
I just want to just say really,
now.
really quickly, because I think this is actually really important. The relentlessness and look, the practical effect is that it is used, and I would listen to the Hear the Burn episode that Bree did recently on the erasure of black support for Bernie in the media and how it functions and all the voices that it just eliminates from public discourse. And in this case, literally, primarily, we're obviously talking about people of color and many women of color. But this is bigger problems than just this campaign. It's a huge problem in this campaign. But you have a ton of people like Nate Silver who clearly have no intellectual, historical, sociological, philosophical, or cultural interest in understanding the immense internal diversity of black politics or anything else, who thinks that because, he reads Joy Reid tweets, that he has a sense of an entire electorate, which again, by the way, I just want to spell this out. To the extent I know what he's talking about with black voters being more quote unquote moderate than white voters, again, that might be the classic thing that from the polling I've seen, that I say literally all the time, which is that most of the electorate is either to the center or to the right on quote unquote cultural issues. There is no evidence.
Even on that talking point.
Even on that talking point. But
he's actually he's erasing like the younger.
Well,
they all. Because
that's the second point. They all erase the younger. That's a given. Of course, he's erasing the younger, but they all do that. We can get to that in a second. But I just really want to underline, though, that when he's saying that, he means that there might be a 55-year-old voter in South Carolina who has a more culturally conservative attitude and also supports labor unions, Medicare for all, and is voting in a Democratic primary, so is not, in fact, voting primarily on those quote-unquote social issues. So even that is a fundamentally disingenuous frame, and it's also a very problematic one because, as you point out, you can just as easily sort of flip that equation and say, like, what is the relative difference between people under 30 versus people over 60 in terms of supporting marriage equality? And if you slice that into race, that's telling you a different story than slicing it generationally or, by the way, geographically. But he doesn't do any of the nuance.
Yeah, it seems he's very ideologically motivated in presenting this data and the kind of data that he presents.
Definitely. Of course.
And just to get this point in here, because I saw somebody tweet this out, and they're like in the leftist best sphere. They were asking like, why is Nate Silver like this? Why did he become like? Why did he end up being like the data guy to this thing that he is now? And I think there's actually a really clear materialist reason for it.
Right.
And that's because he used to be kind of like the sports analytics, and then he did some politics statistics about 5 to 10 years ago. But when ESPN sold 538, they sold 538 to ABC. They actually sold 538 for less than the value of a year's worth of Chapo Trap House's Patreon account.
Oh my god!
Nice. Yeah, I'm gonna get that dunk in there, but It caused Nate Silver to change the business model.
Sure.
And it caused him to do more content production. And that's the problem I think that people have with Nate Silver, is that he does a lot more content production, which means like more articles for the sake of doing articles so
Right.
people can read and we can have
Right.
advertising.
He should be doing like a thing on like these numbers explain why your baseball cards don't matter as much as they
Yeah.
used to. He
And-
should not be trying to actually write about things happening in politics.
Yeah, and when you're doing content for the
Yeah.
sake of doing content and you don't have a whole lot of funding, guess what you do? You do hot takes.
Right. And I mean, I think
the mistake that's made, the mistake that's made by people is that they I guess the danger that I see with 538 is that people look at him again as the finger quotes data guy for like, I guess, normies, but they look at those takes and they see this kind of like random content he produces, which is basically like, frankly, a lot of just trash. And they mistake it by saying, oh, well, this is the data guy. He's got a statistical analysis that backs that
It's
up.
like I'm like the
regardless
ideas
of
guy.
whatever
It's like
the
I'm
take
like
is.
I'm like the ideas guy. He's the data guy. But this is also
Yeah.
another problem. But this is another reason that I've always been so critical of the cult of facts and numbers. Like those things do not a political analysis make. I mean, you can't build a theoretical model that is disconnected from empirical reality, but empirical reality does not give you a theoretical model. And a lot of people, this is Ben Burgess, this is the David Hume thing. There's is and ought. And you have a whole bunch of people like Nate Silver who, because this culture, frankly, gives way too much of a currency to numbers and very specific, narrow skill sets, he has, if somebody, even someone like Sam, right? I mean, maybe this isn't the case, but maybe if somebody like Sam set up a polling blog, there might be some like quant people who would say like, you're not a stat person, you're a commentator. And you need to have the cultural ability to very clearly say to someone like Nate Silver, you clearly do not have the political, analytic, or historical capacity to talk about this stuff beyond doing numbers models. Like that's what you're there to do. And even, by the way, those are questionable as well.
Yeah, not to mention there are some things that can't be measured by polls and numbers. Of
course not.
When we're talking about like the Marxist conception of value or like historical dialectics or like world systems theory or all these like macro phenomena.
Or even people's real experience. I mean, this is why, it can become bullshit on the other end, but this is why people do focus groups and ethnographic research. This is why people actually have to sit down and talk to people and understand the contradictions and tensions in their lives. I mean, Nate Silver has none of it. And don't worry, we will work to undermine his brand steadily.
Yeah, there's
Can I say one last
qualitative
thing on the subject?
Yes,
and
real
quantitative.
quick. Yes, real quick. Go ahead.
Last thing I'll say on this subject, and again, we discuss it in the podcast. Nathan Robinson brings up this point, and I think it's incredibly important, and it should never be lost on anybody. Polling data is always a state of affairs as they exist. And, you can take issue with how a certain methodology is done or all of that. But it's a state of affairs that existed at a single point in time. You can never lose the agency that you can change that. You can actually change the state of affairs. You can actually change people's minds. And you can have people out there in the political sphere who radically reset the entire kind of chessboard for what's available for us.
Right.
And I think that's incredibly important to always keep in mind. Anyway, thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, man.
Have a good day.
What
That's
a
so
depressing world that, watch and read Cornel West. Don't read Nate Silver. It even matters just even on the level of I was walking to the office today listening to a Cornel West lecture. It was just like, our blueprints, even of people that we aspire to be like that. Don't aspire to be
Seriously.
some pointy-headed idiot.
Why do
who's just
people?
I have a quibble. Don't do that.
Why do
aspire to something?
Why do any of these politics, consumers read Nate Silver in the first place? It's because he was at the New York Times.
Right. It's all.
But we're at a point in history now where you don't need to take your information from the main funnels that corporations decide they're going to deliver to you at. You can go look at like 20 hours of Cornell West lectures on YouTube right now.
And like, why do you care
much
about
more
politics
inspired
in
will
the
you
first
be?
place? What is the point of all this? The point of all this is, I mean, I guess some people treat it like it's a game.
Yeah, figure out how to do fantasy politics.
But like the point is supposed to be to make a better world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aim higher.
Aim higher. Watch Cornell West. Don't ever take any of Nate Silver's takes
No.
that don't have to
Unfollow
do.
Nate, hashtag
Yeah,
unfollow
unfollow Nate. And like, look, to get back to talking about like why Kyrie is like shooting poorly in the playoffs. Like do something. And even then I probably still wouldn't follow Nate for that.
Yeah,
But like
I was going to say, I think all these nerds.
No, listen, you know what? Take that back. Listen to Back to Back Bod. Follow Big Waz for sports.
Ever since the stats guys said that the whole hot hand theory fiasco, are you familiar with that? Which they said like you can't have hot streaks in sports; they're all just sort of random variables. And then later it turns out that actually maybe people do have hot streaks.
I think like what all of us who have watched any
taking-
sports can witness with our own
or
eyes.
any of us who
has like in fact happened.
Some of us who felt what it feels
who
like
felt
to make
like to be in the zone.
4 straight 3-pointers. Yeah.
Does it really count though if we're doing that on a playground somewhere?
I don't understand sports analogies, but it is reminds me of what Richard Wolff said about economics, right? How it's not an exact science because the very act of predicting something affects the outcome.
Right.
Like you can test how good a weatherman is by, see what weather he says we're going to have and then see if we have that weather. But economics is absolutely not like that, and neither is politics.
Well, and of course the irony. I mean, that's what Nate Silver's trying
becomes
to
like
do.
a self-fulfilling
Well, that's
prophecy.
what he's doing. I mean, and that's the other tension in this show. Like, that why it's like, yes, I agree with the point about people's lack of focus on policy, but I also don't want to reify that. I mean, there's a reason we talk about policy on the show, is that theoretically we're pushing for a scenario where people are like, hey, wait a second, Joe Biden saying I don't have time to come up with a healthcare plan is a fundamental structural problem to his candidacy. And even the nuance of Elizabeth Warren not being clear on the need for Medicare for all and Bernie Sanders absolutely being clear on it actually really matters, not just on a policy level, but a strategic level. All right, let's watch this from Jeremy Corbyn. Brexit continues to grip the attention of the United Kingdom, even though it's been punted until the fall. I did a video, which you can check out on TMBS, on a sort of broader analysis of Brexit. But the point that I always make is that there is absolutely no guarantee that a people's referendum would reverse the result. People really need to know that. On some level, those who are singularly obsessed with Brexit should be advocating an option where, frankly, the parliament just ignores the will of the referendum and is undemocratic in its approach. I don't think that that's viable, and it's not the approach that I would advocate. But if you go and you have a second referendum that affirms Brexit again, then the crisis is even deeper. And of course, the crisis is already existing. The crisis in terms of real people's lives in the UK goes back to 2012 when David Cameron's government started pounding the working people of Britain with austerity. This is, and poverty is increased and so on. This is Jeremy Corbyn explaining why you need a Labour Brexit.
Brexit that would only work for the richest. Those who want to deregulate, to slash public services, deny rights at work, and still further. It would be a Donald Trump Brexit, leaving us at the mercy of a reckless and bellicose US administration. Nigel Farage's Brexit is a Brexit for conspiracy theorists, for those who see Muslims and migrants or George Soros as their enemy. Right. Only Labour can see off the Farage snake oil in this election.
Farage is the UKIP leader who's the sort of, along with Boris Johnson and others, was the kind of prime engine of the conspiracy-driven, xenophobic, airhead Tory exit campaign. And he's exactly right. It is important, though, to remember that as there were plenty of lies about economic populism from Donald Trump, people like Boris Johnson lied that the money that went to the EU, even though the UK actually has a great arrangement with the EU because they don't have the euro and they have all the advantages of being part of that market. So that's an incredible advantage they have. But they said that the savings from Brexit would get plowed back into NHS. They dropped that lie literally 24 hours after it passed. But this was their bus. This is the Brexit bus. And again, this is as with all of these things. Of course, xenophobia. Of course, anti-establishment, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but you can't forget the economic lies that these people tell. And if you don't think that those have an effect, you're also being blind to reality.
If people wonder why I'm personally maybe a bit cynical about the sort of Nate Silvers or, say, Glenn Kessler Washington Post fact checkers, it's because I spent the summer of 2011 in the UK working for a fact-checking agency called fullfact.org.
Right.
And most of the fact checks were, propaganda bullshit about Brexit.
Right.
And you realize you're I guess peeing into the wind on a lot of this stuff, and this needs to be fought on a political ground and not on a sort of discourse blog.
Yeah.
And look at, I just want to read this in case
blog.
people are listening, and then please go, Jamie. But I just want to make sure everybody gets this. This was the Brexit bus with the slogan "Let's take back control." That was the slogan of the campaign. We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead. Vote leave. Now, even as Tony Blair has pointed out, this is going to, the Tories are going to cut NHS through their Brexit plan.
Yeah, it's a more clear version, I think, of what Trump did as well to try to win in 2016 that liberals still don't want to acknowledge, which is to include some elements of quote unquote populism, populist economics in his stew of, racism and xenophobia. And for a lot of people, it's probably not one thing or the other. It's probably a mixture of things, but it is a very potent combination and shows the need for an actual left critique of globalization and neoliberal capitalism and the real reasons why we're having all these problems. And it's not immigrants. But I wanted to ask you where the left Brexit currently stands, because as I understand, I don't know a ton about it, but we did an episode on the Antifada. As I understood before, it would preserve the free movement of people more or less, but introduce some elements of economic protectionism like they have in the Scandinavian countries.
I don't know I know that what he's proposed in labor is continuing to be part of the customs union so that the trade can generally still flow. And I think I don't know where they are on free movement of people. I know that definitionally it would not exist in the same way because that, the law would just change. That's one of the reasons why Ireland is in crisis. The trick of Good Friday Accords is that there's an open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, right? So that they could all just say, okay, everybody's sort of satisfied with this arrangement, because if you want to treat it like you live in one country, you kind of do, because you can just move, but you're still officially part of the UK. So I don't know. I know more broadly the left case for Brexit goes back to people in the 70s and 80s who had a problem with the EU from the perspective of socialism, which is fine. I agree with that critique, but it's it isn't on the table in any type of real recognizable way in modern politics. So
that's not why they voted for it.
It might even be why a handful of people voted for it, but it just wasn't what pushed it, and what the people behind Brexit are people that don't even want the minimal standards that the EU does have standards. It's the only transnational organization that does have standards like that. They don't want those. They want UK to be not even. I guess they would probably say Singapore, but I don't even think they're not strategically positioned like Singapore. They're not part of a rising continent in terms of a place and a country that's already been trained in such a specific way since the 60s to function as a fulcrum of global capital. So all they're going to do is just continue to degrade their standards.
It's tough. You really can't put the toothpaste back in the tube where globalization is concerned.
No.
Like, unless you have an autarky, like they were talking about in the interview, like we're so interconnected and we're so interdependent. And like, my hope is that socialists can use these networks and, you know, hopefully reform them or even eventually overcome them, but use these connections to build something that's not completely subsumed by the market. I mean,
but that's why I think the Varoufakis, at least idea on an idea level, like he's right, because that's like, he's like, okay, we have this transnational superstructure. It has all these problems. It's destroyed Greece. It's destroyed the southern zone. But the fight is to flip it. The fight is to flip it, not end it. And that's what I think. And I certainly think, like if Lula's vision and Chavez's vision of like a Latin American bloc that could function in a synchronized way to some extent counteract the United States and improve standards, that would be a great thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Short term, flip it. Long term, overcome it.
Okay, let's do Iran for a minute. So Iran, we spoke about yesterday, Iran has started to restart parts of its program after a relentless onslaught. So the United States first threw the international system into turmoil by pulling out of this agreement about a year ago in a way that was, this should start at the beginning of this video, that was completely illogical, that was contradicted by every single piece of evidence that the deal was working, that all members of the deal were following along with it. And in the past several months, with the deployment of a fleet on the Strait of Hormuz, as well as aggressively, when they talk even about getting tough with China as an example, they're talking about targeting the Chinese-Iranian economic relationship. And I have no doubt, following Paul Pillar, who's a former CIA analyst, that the game of Bolton and Pompeo is to try to agitate Iran into making one step that they could use as an excuse for war. This clip from friend of both shows, friend of mine, Mike Hanna at Al Jazeera, documents some of the global reaction to this. And it starts in the UK where Pompeo is visiting. Really striking and really worth noting that, of course, the French and the Chinese, who you'll hear from as well, are rejecting this. But this far-right Tory government also wanted to preserve the deal.
The US Secretary of State arrives at 10 Downing Street for talks with the British Prime Minister. The staunch US ally deeply alarmed by the Iranian announcement and making clear it continues to oppose the US decision to pull out of the 2015 nuclear deal.
Iran must never be able to acquire a nuclear weapon. It's no secret that we have a different approach on how best to achieve that. The UK has continued to support the nuclear deal, which is a key achievement of the global non-proliferation architecture, because we believe it's in our shared security interests.
Mike Pompeo insisting differences over the Iran agreement would not impact on the transatlantic relationship.
We're on the same side. We're on the side of values-driven democracy. We're on the side of freedom. We're on the side of creating a nation for the Iranian people where they can have religious freedom and they can have a democracy.
But other signatories to the nuclear agreement are adamant the US must be held accountable should Iran follow through on its threat.
Cela fait maintenant plusieurs mois.
For a few months now, the deal that was signed in Vienna to keep Iran's nuclear activities in check has been undermined, because exactly a year ago, the U.S. decided to pull out from the deal and not respect it.
China approves of the way that Iran has thoroughly carried out its duty to comprehensively fulfill the agreement. We oppose the unilateral sanctions implemented by the U.S. and its so-called long-arm jurisdiction.
This is a war that, of course, is going to get pushed by Saudi Arabia, by Israel, by the Emirates, by the prime forces. Those are the prime forces, along with Trump, of instability and danger in the Middle East right now. And obviously, it should go without saying, of course, Mike Pompeo, who's literally celebrating the acceleration of a global climate crisis. Mike Pompeo, who works hand in glove to support the Saudi endless crimes and murders and savagery that the U.S. is supporting in Yemen every single day, in spite of the efforts of Bernie Sanders and Ro Khanna and others in Congress, right? So obviously him talking about the rights situation in Iran is a disgusting, absurd joke.
There's a new sort of fascist tactic that Pompeo exhibits there, which is to act as if there is no disagreement, and that you just have all the outward signs that, oh, we all agree here. I agree with Jeremy Hunt that we're on the same side. Like
Jeremy Hunt specifically in his most polite way, again, far right Tory government, right wing defense minister or foreign minister, saying we supported the goal of not having Iran proliferate was best fulfilled by the agreement that you guys are destroying.
And Pompeo just acts
that's the
like
fundamental right.
It's so scary when they do that.
Right. There's no disagreement here except for the fundamental disagreement that my counterpart just articulated.
And they know that Hunt's not going to be like, wait a second, Mike.
Right.
I'm telling you, we got a problem here, because they're not
Right.
going to stop the press conference that way. It's stagecraft.
Precisely. And I will say on the sort of, Pompeo's competent. I mean, he's one of the few people around who's at that nexus of, no daylight between him and a Donald Trump in terms of avarice, extremism. He might also have overlap with Pence in terms of a fanatical, dangerous religious worldview. But this guy knows how to do. I'm tired of it. And it's only on our side that we talk about people get stuff done. They don't really use that rhetoric on the side that gets stuff done, unfortunately. But Mike Pompeo, he's an operator and definitely one of the most dangerous people on earth today. Let's continue then, actually, because this is also Mike Pompeo. I mean, it's not enough to try to instigate what would be, if we had war with Iran, I would say, at the very least, a lot of the kind of meaningless bullshit and nonsense and catfights and ridiculousness that people get into all day might be put into stark perspective, because I don't even want to contemplate. Like, you already have slaughterhouses in Yemen and Syria. You still have major instability in Iraq, and that conflict cost millions of lives and displaced millions of people because of the U.S. invasion. If you had a military engagement with Iran, I don't even want to put that out there, honestly. You need to seriously contemplate how catastrophically bad that is.
If that leads to a world war the way we're at
That
now,
is one of the only
the recipe for
melodrama-
totalitarianism.
Really. And it's also one of the only melodramatic scenarios where I could say, like, you know what? I actually could see a path where that could lead to some type of kind of broader, conflict. But even if it didn't, the amount, first of all, obviously goes without saying, but of course this is no concern to these people. You'll kill an enormous amount of innocent people in Iran. But the Iranians, while on one hand, the threat of Iran is ludicrous. Iran doesn't even spend the most of its military on anybody in the Middle East, and they're no threat to the United States. Anybody that would say otherwise is either, mentally ill or lying or having fever dreams. But they do know how to operate in terms of, training guerrillas, in terms of fighting different types of insurgencies, and even in Iraq, in a disorganized way that was splintered by all sorts of factional variables. There were times where we were facing Shia militias or Sunni groups without any kind of centralized command structure, and a government of Saddam Hussein that had not a huge base of support, certainly not the amount that the Iranians do. Not to mention no international respect, which the Iranians do have under Rouhani and Zarif to some extent. They were able to cause havoc and kill a huge amount of U.S. troops. If that happens wow. Okay. So it's not enough to try to instigate a global catastrophe like a war with Iran. Of course, Mike Pompeo, along with John Bolton, is still trying to instigate a coup in Venezuela. I watched a great interview recently with a Venezuelan sociologist in Caracas who was very much, I'm forgetting his name, unfortunately. He was on with Charmony Paris in The Real News. I like her work. He had a strong critique of the Bolivarian government and very much a left critic of Maduro and Chavez. And if you want to watch some example of, I would say in his case, more of a social democratic critique, but someone on the left, someone who absolutely opposes U.S. intervention, but is totally dissatisfied and disgusted with that government, go ahead, and it's worth watching. He still is warning himself, this sociologist, that this action could lead to a civil war in Venezuela. And while he was criticizing some in the U.S. for, in his view, whitewashing Maduro, he still said, of course, your primary obligation is to oppose U.S. imperialism and intervention. So, again, without opening all of that up, it's important to just reaffirm that there is no credible person speaking from Venezuela, including ones who might absolutely loathe that government or be critical supporters of it or supporters of it. They absolutely exist, who want a U.S. intervention and invasion. Jeremy Corbyn opposes it because he opposes these types of actions pretty forcefully. And in the last couple of days, Bernie Sanders has strongly sharpened his position on this as well. And again, I absolutely will always give props to Tulsi Gabbard on her Venezuela stance. Here's Mike Pompeo trying to demonize Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders for trying to avert yet another catastrophe that he's attempting to engineer.
It is disgusting to see leaders in not only the United Kingdom, but in the United States as well, who continue to support the murderous dictator, Maduro. And it is not in either of our country's best interests for those leaders to continue to advocate on the behalf. The Venezuelan people have spoken.
Pause. Yes, they have. They have spoken. They have opposed every single coup action that this government has attempted since 2002. They are not even supporting this Guaido nonsense at a time of unprecedented pressure on them. And if you want to relieve their suffering, lift the sanctions and stop economic and military terrorism. And the notion of Mike Pompeo using the word disgusting to describe anyone else is mind-boggling. He's talking about people who have not said a word in support of Maduro, at least in Bernie's case, opposing a coup. This guy works every day to support a cholera outbreak and bombing school buses and nursing homes and weddings in Yemen. I know that's even beyond pointing out hypocrisy. That's pointing out that you're a fucking despicable, grotesque, less than human thing. But let's finish the clip.
People have spoken. Through their constitutional mechanism, they have put Juan Guaido as their interim president, and he is the duly elected leader there. And Maduro is on borrowed time. And to see American leaders or leaders from this country continue to provide support and comfort to a regime that has created so much devastation, so much destruction. I was in Colombia. I saw those families who had to make choices about whether to feed their children on even days or odd days. That is a direct result of Nicolas Maduro, and no leader in a country with Western democratic values ought to stand behind them.
Then lift the sanctions. It's a direct result of you. This government has put pressure onto banks to not releasing funds that are the Venezuelan government's funds. They've economically terrorized the place. Release the sanctions. Period. That is so, I mean, you know, it's one thing to do the usual typical bullshit where the United States obviously always picks and chooses. It supported death squads and dictators across the planet, and then it condemns other people for their human rights record. We all know this. There's nothing new about this. But the juxtaposition of, by the way, trying to set off, I mean, don't forget Elliot Abrams, the PR man of all of the butchers of the Reagan era, is the point man for this. He's talking about anybody is anything while he is backing the war on Yemen. I would use the word genocide. Again, it's not even hypocrisy. There has to be a new word because, hypocrisy, first of all, doesn't mean anything. And hypocrisy is like a human trait. We all have hypocrisy. We all we shouldn't be moralists with each other. But that is another, that is just a fundamental disconnect. That's just being completely divorced from any sense of self or any moral scope of the world. I mean, it's next level. I don't know if what I'm saying makes any sense, but it's grotesque.
He's not talking about the poor of Venezuela when he says the Venezuelan people, ever.
To say the least.
He's talking about the ruling class.
He's not talking about the middle class. He's not talking about anybody. I mean, I don't even know if he's talking about any actual Venezuelans. He's I mean, a handful of pliant right-wing junta people that will do whatever the United States directs them. Because there is, on some level, I think on the left, we can't just support governments just because they find themselves in opposition to the United States, right? Yeah. At the same time, there's no doubt that Iran and Venezuela also just represent ideas that there are places that aren't first world countries that don't acquiesce to the United States. And therefore, in the mindset of people like Mike Pompeo, they need to be destroyed. Yeah. There is something that is so raw and imperialist about it that's undeniable. And of course, there's strategic calculations and so on, but some of it is as simple as that. The left-handed leftist, since they're a real populist running, will that preclude Biden from running on any sort of populist message as Obama and Clinton did? No.
He's going to be real vague about it.
He's precluding that himself.
Yeah, I mean, but people are going to run how they're going to, you got to point out that he's full of shit and that Biden and Bernie's real. They're never going to. It's not like Biden's going to go, oh, well, you know what? Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are running. I guess I can't pretend to be a friend of the middle class. The guy in 24 hours announced getting the support of the firefighters union and said he was a labor guy, and then did a fundraiser at a union-busting Comcast house. That's who Joe Biden is. That's what most of the Democratic Party is.
Yeah, you can't be a handmaiden to a trade deal that was opposed by every labor union and then go up and say, I'm a union guy. Only you can because he did. Right. And we have to call him out.
See, that's the point. They totally can. It's our job to point it out, but they can and they will.
And that's what Warren and Bernie are doing with the policy proposals that they're putting out right now. They're just literal landmines for Biden to step on his path towards the presidency. And we'll see if voters will react. That's what it is.
I want to be optimistic about that.
This is good. Let's play this. Joe Courtney is a congressman from Connecticut.
Yeah,
and he's explaining. He's explaining the Stop and Shop strike and the broader importance of the right to organize. This is a couple of minutes, but this is really quite important. Let's check it out.
Just wanted to follow up actually on the chairwoman's opening comments about the value of unions in terms of the standard of living of workers. Up in New England, we actually witnessed the value of collective bargaining when 31,000 workers who are organized with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union and employed by Stop and Shop, a grocery chain owned by Ahold Delhaize, a Danish company, successfully exercised their rights to strike over proposed cuts to their pay and benefits. It was an 11-day strike, and the company obviously calculated that they could outlast the union. What was at stake was almost existential for the middle-class way of life for the people who work there. Thanks. The employer proposed increasing health plan deductibles from $300 a year to $5,000 a year. They had proposed more than doubling health insurance premiums. They had proposed removing spousal coverage for health insurance. They proposed eliminating time and a half on Sundays, and they also proposed slashing pension contributions for full-time employees by half. What the company miscalculated was that, in fact, the public would support the picket lines that stood up in those grocery stores, again, in all the New England states. And after 11 days, the strike ended, and the UFCW was successful in restoring all of those out-of-pocket hits that workers would have taken and were not even close to being offset by any sort of modest wage increases which were proposed. So again, from the standpoint of the people who stock the shelves and work the cashier lines who I met with afterwards, who again felt that they had taken their own economic destiny into their own hands by exercising their right to strike, it obviously paid off big time for them. So I know today, Ms. Samira's testimony, he has pointed to what he believes the employer's ability to permanently replace economic strikers carefully balances competing interests. The PRO Act obviously would change that to not allow replacement strikers. Just looking at the experience of what just happened up in New England, where, again, 31,000 workers stood up for their way of life and their standard of living.
This is excellent. He actually really presented that and articulated that really well. And also, I like that, look, That's the broader context. When we talked about the Stop and Shop strike, it was like, don't go. Hold that line. Give them your support. Because that is what the company's strategy is, that there's so much obvious basic desperation in people's lives so they can terrorize them economically. But then that also we're so socially fragmented and disconnected from each other that we won't actually stand in support of fellow human beings who want to live a decent life and not be, just endlessly, rapaciously abused by these companies. And that was what the people of New England did with Stop and Shop. And that's why it's an incredible win. And that's also why striking and unions, there's no way we're going to get where we need to go without strikes and unions, period. I don't see how that's humanly possible.
That's why that's sort of there's two things that are sort of baseline when people want to know what they can do to, have an effect. Is one, like we say, vote smart, but also never cross a picket line and support every single strike that comes down the pike.
100%. 100%. Support every single strike. And here's an example, I guess, of Delta, the airline, trying to do some silly propaganda against unions.
Against?
This is goofy shit, but union busting as a private consulting industry hired by multinationals like Delta is actually a major business. I believe that was part of the business portfolio of the lawyer that hosted the first Joe Biden fundraiser. I just always like to remember, as Matt Karp wrote that great Bernie profile that just came out in The Nation, The Transformation of Bernie Sanders. It's a really good piece. And he has one very nice juxtaposition where he sort of talks about how, I think it was Bernie in his 30s or at 40, maybe when he first got elected to become mayor of Burlington and the work he was doing for land trusts, keeping people in their homes and supporting worker-owned businesses. And he said something like, at about the same age that Joe Biden was writing letters to segregationist senators to stop integrate school, and at the same time that Kamala Harris was soliciting multinational donors for her lock people up campaigns, Bernie Sanders was creating a land trust. I think I like that juxtaposition there. So this is a Delta ad. Union dues cost around $700 a year. A new video game system with the latest hit sounds like fun. Wait, a video game system with the latest hit sounds like fun. Put your money towards that instead of paying dues to a union. And then there's a gaming, what do they call that?
A controller.
Gaming controller. So, of course,
this wouldn't appeal to Michael, but
yeah, this wouldn't appeal to me. Literally, I would be like, "What? Why do I want?" I would spend
We've been trying to unionize MR, and then Sam slipped this to Matt, and now our prospects are doomed.
Right, exactly. But of course, the point being that without a union, you won't be able to afford that gaming system to begin with, and you'll probably be so exhausted from flying in dangerous and hazardous conditions.
This is why you join a union, is so you can afford the gaming system with the new games, and you can also negotiate for more time off. So let's say you want
play them.
Let's say you want 2 Wednesdays off a month, so you can play video games during the day.
Just a thought.
I don't have the stats in front of me, but I'm pretty sure unionized workers, the difference between non-union wages and union wages is a lot more than $700 a year.
Yeah. And also, if you've ever heard stories or seen reported stories on people that are airline pilots who make $30,000 a year and might even be dealing with homelessness, kind of some good counter evidence here.
Air travel really is where the squeeze comes down.
It's where this, and also if you watch this if you see this as a Delta worker, what do they take you for?
Yeah.
Seriously. What kind of fucking moron do they think you are?
That fucking cheaply.
And you're so stupid that you can't even I get the gut punch arguments, in jobs where it's hey, you're so fundamentally squeezed that you need every 5 cents. We're exploiting you so much that you're worried about paying for groceries so you can play on a fear and a scarcity that the company has created. This is the hey man, don't you want more time to fucking game? They think you're an idiot.
Yeah,
this is a great expression of what kind of loser Delta thinks their employees are.
Yeah, if anything, this would make me want to unionize more.
Exactly. Because fuck you.
Yeah, how much time would it save if Delta wasn't wasting their money on this sort of shit?
Right. That's what I want. How about a company audit of all of the money you're paying to some idiot firm to keep your workers from having a decent life? Just disgusting and unbelievable. All right, we have 2 more pieces of sound we got to get to before we wrap up. But I do think this is important. What is the Sartre essay where he sort of talks also about, like, I don't want to open up a whole sort of, debate about comedy and so on, but I think that this is really obvious, a distinction between irony and humor and people being sensitive or insensitive, because this is the president of the United States in an environment where there was already a paramilitary force terrorizing migrants, where children have died in ICE custody, where families have been separated, still to this day, not reunited, because of the racist terrorist policies of this administration. There are insane, crazy people at the border, deeply, deeply damaged people living out like Bruce Willis fantasies, who, their own profound, unease, fragmentation, and lack of meaning is manifesting in some sort of horrifying fantasy at the border, fueled by Donald Trump and Breitbart and Fox and all of the other sort of prime purveyors of racism, conspiracy, and poison. That's why this actually matters. And this matters from the perspective of somebody who both thinks Trump can be funny and thinks that people need to, let's just get on with beating this motherfucker. Or frankly, impeach him or don't. This is part of, I actually don't oppose impeaching Donald Trump. If they actually had a serious path, if they were not messing around and they were like, you know what? Donald Trump and his administration are regularly breaking the law and showing disdain to Congress.
They are what this was made for.
Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to impeach him. We're not going to this person called that person, and then we had a hearing, and then we did this, and we did that. In the beautiful words of Rashida Tlaib, impeach the motherfucker or don't. And if you're not, then we've got to beat him, and that's it. And I'm not going to freak out over every last this and that. But this matters because this is a wink. In my opinion, this is a wink to murder.
I mean, when you have 15,000 people marching up and you have hundreds and hundreds of people and you have 2 or 3 border security people that are brave and great, and don't forget, we don't let them, and we can't let them use weapons. We can't. Other countries do. We can't. I would never do that. But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no...
Pause it. So the person said, shoot him, from the audience.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Okay.
But how do you stop these people? You can't. There's no... That's only in the panhandle you can get away with that statement.
Even the woman behind him, right to the left, she's doing the E.
Right, yeah. right.
It's only in the panhandle you can get away with that statement.
He's like, oh, you.
These people are cheering.
Only in the panhandle. So it's a tough situation, but...
These people are cheering murdering unarmed migrants. These people are cheering somebody who said, I'm escaping a paramilitary that might murder me. By the way, I'll be covering this later, but there's an incredible piece in Harper's, reported piece on a process that began, I think, in 2009, where a former leader of one of the leftist guerrilla organizations who had gone on to run a small business after the Civil War stopped and dealt with gangs because he had to pay them extortion and stuff. And then a former leader of the military teamed up to create a peace process for gangs in El Salvador that yielded big results. That guy is now in jail because the current government has decided that it wasn't a peace process. It was a pro-gang scheme. And violence has re-exploded. In the interview in that prison, he holds the United States primarily responsible for asserting that you need to get back to get tough policies. So again, our policy set is always at the center of these things. I'm saying people make their own decisions. countries have their own problems. It's not all reducible to one thing, but we're always involved. And, so take somebody who's fleeing that situation. You've at this point heard endless amount of stories about what that actually means. They're joking about killing one of those people. I've just scrapped my way to get to the U.S.-Mexico border, which I already know the United States is run by a fucking scumbag clown fascist who has empowered a paramilitary organization to terrorize people like me, that they're totally violating every type of norm on refugees. And I'm here because I literally have no choice but to leave and maybe get my neck slit. And these people are joking about shooting them in the face. That's great. Here is and by the way, I mean like literally, like this is one of the reasons why you should sometimes reserve your moral outrage, because that requires moral outrage.
Yeah. Not
everything does. A lot of things don't, in my opinion. But that's something you need to be clear about. That is disgusting. That is canceling of any basic human sentiment you're supposed to have. Your wiring's off if you think that's funny.
Yeah, it's such a disgusting trope, and it's an old one that we've been seeing for many decades.
Definitely.
Anytime that the government needs to paint some people as the other, as less than human, so that we can kill them in a war, terrorize them at the border,
concentrate them
into camps, score some political points. It's disgusting, and it goes back to that Jean Raspail Camp of the Saints shit in the 1970s. That book in which the immigrants to the West, which is, by the way, a very recent concept and not something that has always existed. They're just portrayed as this like brown invading horde, and like the descriptions of them are like some of the most disgusting racist things I've ever read. And I don't think that Trump has read that book, but I do know that Steve Bannon has read that book.
Publicly says it's one of his favorite books.
Tucker Carlson has read that book, and these ideas are filtering into this administration.
Definitely. Or they could all just be trying to have fun.
Former Chief of Staff to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Josh, welcome back and good morning to you. Strikes me the campaign kicked off last night. Did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, no question. And I think there's a good golden rule of politics. It's the candidate who looks like he's having the most fun is usually the one that's winning. And the contrast there from President Trump and his rally last night in Florida, I mean, everybody seemed to be having a lot of fun. And you can contrast that with how these 2020ers have been marching around the country in this sort of dour mood, full of negativity. And so, I think you're right. The campaign has started, and I think it looks okay.
These are psychopaths.
Humor sells, right? I mean, it
does.
It's very underrated, Josh.
It is. And nobody does it better than President Trump. It starts with the nicknames, but he also just keeps it light. I mean, these got to be the first entertaining rallies in the history of politics. I mean, mostly these things are pretty dry, and it's all about speaking to the partisans. But, I mean, I think most people can watch this and be entertained.
Well, I think we had some very entertaining.
Yeah, but I think, excuse me, I mean, maybe Americans don't appreciate the effort we put into art and design.
The sports
yes, but I think a lot of people in the flames would come up.
Have you never seen Triumph of the Will?
Yeah. No, you wouldn't, because you're fucking American pigs who don't like art.
It didn't even have any choreography there.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, these guys are psychopaths. And secondly, yes, the campaign started. You're going to hear a hell of a lot more of this. Absolutely. And thirdly, Chief of Staff to Mitch McConnell. There's people to this day who still want to make a distinction between Donald Trump and the Republican Party. And you know who the lead person in the country is right now who wants to distinguish between Donald Trump and the Republican Party?
Biden.
Fucking Biden. Recognize how delusional and dangerous that is. And again, just as Bhaskar Sunkara cut an ad for Bernie Sanders, and the point he made, I've been making for a very long time. I think Joe Biden probably would beat Donald Trump. I do. I don't undermine. From the beginning, I think I've usually been one in the room who's like, guys, I get we all hate him, but this guy is super formidable as a candidate. But you know what? After 2 years of Joe Biden telling millennials he doesn't have empathy for them and trying to reimpose the Davos agenda on us, all of the symptoms, all of the poison, Bill Fletcher Jr., right-wing populism is the herpes of capitalism. That stuff is not going anywhere.
It's
only going to metastasize. It does not start and end with Donald Trump. Think strategically. Think historically.
If there's a route Joe Biden could take to lose, he's taking it.
That's also totally true. That's also totally true. Yes, and as the Democratic Party, I mean, if anybody could snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, it's them. All right. Final call of the day. Sorry, couldn't get to all callers. Maybe we'll try to get to 2, but we have to run. You're calling from a Skype. Are you there?
Oh, hello. Wagwan, what are you saying?
Hello. Hey, what's up? What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
You're on.
Oh, man, it's Ian from London.
Hey, Ian, what's going on? How are you, Ian? What's on your mind?
I'm good. So I have a list here. So these are the options you can choose. You can choose whatever you want to talk to. What I say to be non-controversial in the office, like I call it my Venezuela third way about the whole situation. My strategy for how Sam could use classical libertarianism as like an actual policy platform, or we could talk about anti-Semitism in British politics.
All right, let's go 3. Let's do 3. Anti-Semitism in British politics. Let's do it.
So basically, I think for Americans, and especially I saw that clip about what Meghan McCain said, I see a lot of anti-Semitism in British politics. She's just lapping up, basically, and I'm sure you know how the Labour Party is being attacked for being institutionally anti-Semitic,
right,
and everything else. And I'm going to preface the whole conversation by saying, of course, anti-Semitism exists, but I think people just see it as like a blanket thing and not understanding the differences of how anti-Semitism appears on the left and how it appears on the right. I mean, I think one thing that is very easy for Americans to forget about the UK is that the Jewish population here is a lot smaller and has a lot less of a presence in British culture generally as compared to America. I mean, when I think of America, one of the first things that comes to my mind is like, Jewish like comedians, because that's like a thing that's just grown up over there. But we don't really have a similar thing here. I'm sorry. Let me just get to like a key point. And so basically, one critique that's always brought up is, I think in the UK, because there's not many Jewish people around, it's very difficult to say the wrong things and not be questioned about that until after the fact. Whereas I feel like in the US, those kind of conversations in the left or just generally are a lot more. The language uses.
So you're going to say that the Labour Party is maybe paying? Because I've always kind of said that I don't think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. I do think that there are some parts of the British left that are not even in Labour, but I think that there is some more actual anti-Semitism that actually exists in British politics than here, where it's pretty much entirely on the right in the United States. But that Jeremy Corbyn is somebody who, when he's misspoken or said things that are insensitive or missed certain cues, it's because, he's not been around Jewish people. And, that's always been my read. And I certainly don't read actual anti-Semitism from him.
No, and I guess another way that anti-Semitism is being weaponized in the UK is to implicate the Muslim population.
Sure.
So obviously, the same thing that's happening to Ilhan Omar has been happening here for a while, in the sense of you are castigating someone's religion by being de facto anti-Israel, and not anti-Israel. So there I go again. See what I did just there? And anti-Semitic, just because they are anti-Israel. But then the reason why that's even more compounded here is, again, because we have less sort of direct integration and communication with the Jewish community in the UK, because it's a lot more centralized and a lot less of them, then it's just very easy for someone who is Muslim to say things, right? Either that be on Twitter. I mean, there's been
I get your point. So people, exposure helps. Exposure helps. That makes total sense. And also, there's a huge campaign in both places to just equate any criticism and discussion of Israel with anti-Semitism. But people also need to learn, to speak about that in a way that's, strategic and empathetic. Thanks for the call, man. Appreciate it. That makes a lot of sense. Last call of the day. You're calling from an 865 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Terry from Tennessee. I got a couple quick questions. My first question is about your sponsor, Liquid IV.
Let's skip that because we only have time for like one question. So let's take up the one question.
Also, none of us have anything to do with that. So
That's also true.
Yes. I just had a question about the Problem Solvers Caucus. You think that they're something that we should be focused on as far as trying to get Medicare for All passed? Because I was just looking at who's a member of them and who's not a co-sponsor of the Medicare for All bill, and 6 out of the 31 members of the Problem Solvers Caucus are on as co-sponsors.
I don't know anything about the Problem Solvers Caucus. It sounds like a very dumb. Sounds like a terrible name for a caucus.
Yeah, I mean, raise the Problem Solvers Caucus. Do anything you can to, discredit everybody involved in that, especially Gottheimer, who Ryan Grimm just wrote a good article in The Intercept, I think, yesterday about.
He's
Gottheimer.
the self-anointed resistance to Rashida Tlaib AOC and Omar wing of the party.
Oh, well, fuck that guy.
He's extremely in the pocket of...
It sounds about.
So it sounds like the problems they're trying to solve are like people's efforts to get health care and housing and whatnot.
Well, and make sure, Gottheimer specifically wants to make sure Israel and Saudi Arabia are looked after.
Right.
But you know how AOC got in trouble? AOC got in trouble for wanting to make a list of people to primary. If you want a list of people to primary, it's called the Problem Solvers Caucus.
Yeah, that sounds like it sounds like we have some problems we could solve by primarying all of those people. All right, thanks everybody. Sorry, no more time for any more calls. Just two or three more items. Leaf Sage. I'm not a supporter of Uber's practices, but I like to say they've made a big difference in the ability of African Americans to get around. Before Uber, it is well known taxis actively ignored black riders. Uber's apps made the process of choosing customers race agnostic and put in punishment for those trying to abandon black riders. Also, taxis would never bother to patrol black neighborhoods instead of only patrolling city centers.
You have to decouple this from Uber, the company, and the technology of ride-hailing, which is like just GPS plus, map and the internet.
Yeah, there are yellow cabs that use
ride-hailing. That's also true. But I've heard, and granted, anecdotally, I've heard from both. I've heard from black drivers of Ubers that they deal with a huge amount of racism, but I guess that's not the problem you're talking about. But I've heard some. I'm not sure. But anyways, okay. I'm sorry. I'm truncating it because it's a long message. But she just concludes, or they conclude with, Uber's a terrible company, but it's done for a lot of us, a lot for us. I just wish they weren't evil.
We talked to on Two Dope Boys. I remember having a conversation. Phil was talking about stuff like this. It's definitely like that. That problem is something that's addressed by the technology.
Definitely.
You shouldn't thank Travis Kalanick or whatever.
Well, right. That's the other thing. Then here you could use the yellow taxi app for sure.
Once again,
right.
When I talk about
that's a very important point.
Something. It doesn't mean that you negate that thing. It means that you take the positive things and build on it to something new that obviates the last thing. So if there is one positive aspect of ride-hailing technology, cool, let's keep that and let's use it when we have like a worker-owned cooperative.
Definitely. Quam. I just caught Tuesday's show. Being an asshole is not a logical fallacy is my new favorite quote of all time. I think it deserves to be clipped, and it would be a perfect caller drop for when a caller gets mad during a debate. I agree completely. Also, Matt, we need to clip, obviously, Meghan McCain saying maybe we have disagreements in geopolitical politics. Come on. Jesus Christ. That is, if anything was begging to be made into a drop. And I'm just even ignoring all of the words she misused in that clip, like leverage. And
Yeah, but would you get... Yeah.
What was the other one? Leverage and currency?
Credence.
Oh, credence, right. Oh, man. Aggressive stupidity is quite a thing. All MR fans should listen to the Pitchfork Economics podcast. Great for learning more in depth about the concrete concepts discussed here. Also, Chris Hayes' latest episode, Why Is This Happening?, has Stephanie Kelton on explaining deficits in MMT.
The other podcast roundup.
Yeah, I was going to say this. I'm not reading those anymore. Those are not, yeah, exactly. I shouldn't have read that.
We know we have a bunch of fans who are big podcast heads. So.
No, that's great, but it's just a little like, okay. Fair enough. Michael's Simpson impression of Sam. Hey, Michael, in Canada, the person credited with getting the universal pass most credited with getting universal health care passed in 1965. Tommy Douglas was voted the greatest Canadian some years ago. He's also the founder of the New Democratic Party. Health is always the top issue of elections, usually even today. All right. That makes total sense. But the final IM of the day. Seb Gorka's business card. Oh, excuse me. The final IM of the day. Regarding the hatred of Bernie, about a month ago, Lawrence O'Donnell praised him on Twitter for spearheading Medicare for All. Reading the replies to that tweet was one of the most horrifying and disturbing experiences of my lifetime. Look, I mean, first of all, obviously, these are MSNBC viewers. And, look, people like Rachel Maddow, I'm sorry. These are totally not trusted sources on Bernie Sanders. Sorry. They don't like, the analogy is like really simple. Like, look, don't watch TMBS for a fair treatment of Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar. It'd
be a waste of any audience's time.
So don't watch most of the MSNBC lineup for any type of fair treatment of Bernie Sanders.
Don't watch television for news.
I'm trying to be more diplomatic here, but yes, the main answer is, are you kidding me? Also, Jesus Christ, turn on Amy Goodman for Christ's sake. Speaking of
open a book.
Or open a book, God forbid.
People need to get over this concept of politicians as like celebrities or like people you like or like people you want to have a beer with. Like, no, you're trying to express your power through whatever power you have through your vote to get the policies passed that you want.
But I think
end of story.
But I also think that's the other part too, is that, a lot of people, particularly like, again, in the, some of the, I think overall, even if you were in the upper middle class, Sanders' agenda is best for you. That being said, I think that there are a fair amount of people who identify upwards versus downwards. And they identify with the Democratic Party because of some very important social attitudes and some just basic cultural signifiers. They don't care about justice. They don't care about poverty. They don't think about people not having food, health, clothing, and shelter. And they certainly don't. God forbid you think about the United States' impact on the rest of the world. And so it's easy to absorb all of the just silly propaganda about Sanders. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I just don't indulge in so many criticisms of him. Is I have never seen in politics such an incredible disconnect between. I've never seen somebody disliked for so many just fatuously disingenuous, stupid, nonsensical reasons. Look, some 77-year-old powering himself around the country to get you health care is a pretty good political leader. So I think we're going to just need to ground in that reality a little bit.
Well, I do understand that there are women out there who just want a woman president,
but
and
that's
that
not
is
even
the most important thing to them right now.
But I'm not even talking.
And they think that Bernie is standing in the way of that. And then they project all of the other bullshit that they've ever had to deal with from men onto him, which is obviously not his fault. But you know what? To those people, I say, you want to be woke, you want to support other women, you want to support people of color, prove it. Support the person who's going to do that.
See you tomorrow.
Otherwise, it's narcissism.
See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know.